The evening Caleb Thorne saw 3 shapes moving through the snow toward his gate. He almost didn't open it. It was 30 below and dropping. The kind of cold that didn't announce itself. It just arrived and stayed and took what it wanted. The wind came off the north ridge in long sustained waves, finding every gap in a coat and every crack in a wall, working at them the way water finds its level. The woman walked in front, a baby on one hip, a boy of 7 holding the other hand, both of them wrapped in everything she owned. She stopped at the gate and looked at him directly, not asking, not pleading, and said the words he would think about for the rest of his life. Milk for my children, and a roof warm enough that they won't die in it tonight. That's all I'm asking. I'll fix your barn, your wind wall, and your pipes, and I'll put hot food in your house every night until the snow breaks. Caleb Thorne had not had a warm house in 3 years. He had not had a reason to keep one. He opened the gate. Her name was Evelyn Vance. She was 34 years old and had been walking for 6 hours. The baby on her hip was Clara, 11 months, who had stopped crying around the 3rd hour and gone, simply quiet, the interior quiet of a child who has run through the available options and is now enduring, which is not something you want to see in an 11-month-old. The boy was Eli, 7, who had not complained once in 6 hours of hard, cold walking, which frightened Evelyn more than complaints would have, because Eli was a boy of opinions, and he only went quiet like this when he understood that complaining was no longer an option. Caleb Thorne looked at the 3 of them and felt something he had not felt in a long time, not warmth, not welcome, but something older and less optional. The pull of a creature in distress that operates below language. He felt it in his chest before he understood it in his mind. He opened the gate. He stepped back and let them through. What Caleb did not say, standing there in the cold with the gate open, was that 3 weeks earlier a man named Gideon Sterling had ridden up that same drive with 2 large men behind him and an offer that was not really an offer. Sterling owned most of Pine Ridge Basin and was in the process of owning the rest. He was patient and well-resourced, and he understood that time in the Montana frontier favored the man with more of both. Silver Creek Ranch was one of the last independent operations in the valley. Caleb Thorne had been running it alone for 3 years, which Sterling had noted and considered an advantage, not for Caleb. "Sell now at my price," Sterling had said pleasantly, sitting his horse in Caleb's yard, "or sell later at a worse one. Winter has a way of making decisions for people who won't make them for themselves." Caleb had said nothing. Sterling had ridden away, but the pipes had frozen twice since then, and the barn roof was losing boards to the wind at a rate that concerned him, and the Roosgar wall on the north face of the barn had developed a lean that he checked every morning and which had gotten worse each time he checked it. 3 years alone was a long time to maintain a working ranch. The work had a way of finding the edges of what one man could manage, of pressing at them steadily, of locating the places where things had been deferred one season to many. He had not hired help because people in the house meant voices, and voices meant the particular silence that followed when they left, a silence with weight and shape, worse than the silence of a place that has simply always been quiet. He had learned that distinction the hard way. He had decided, without formally deciding, that ordinary silence was safer. Then Evelyn Vance appeared at his gate in 30 below cold, and he had opened it. The first thing she did that first evening was feed her children. Caleb had milk to cows in the barn, more than he needed for one person, considerably more, and he brought it in without being asked and heated it on the stove without making a ceremony of it. The way you do a thing that is simply the right thing to do and does not require acknowledgement. He poured it into a tin cup for Clara, which Evelyn held for her, and into a larger cup for Eli, who took it with both hands and drank without pausing, and then looked at the bottom of the cup as though confirming that it was actually empty. The sound Clara made drinking warm milk in that kitchen, in that cold, after 6 hours on the road, a sound of absolute and uncomplicated animal satisfaction, of a thing that needed something getting. It was a sound that moved through Caleb Thorne in a way he could not have described and would not have tried to. He stood at the stove with his back to them and listened to it and did not turn around for a long time. Evelyn ate what was on the table, cold cornbread and the remains of a pot of beans, standing up, because she was already studying the house around her, with the attention of someone calculating what needs doing and in what order. She had been a carpenter's wife for 9 years. She knew what a neglected house looked like from the inside, and how to read which things had been let go first, which told you about the person living in it. The pipes first, then the wind wall, then the barn roof. The windows were filmed with cold weather grime. There were no curtains. She could see the rod hardware above each window, still mounted. The rods were there, like a question that hadn't been answered. She did not say any of this. She finished eating, cleaned up after herself and her children, without being asked or acknowledged, put Clara down on the rug near the stove with the folded blanket she had been carrying in her pack all day and which was still, despite everything, mostly dry. Then she looked at Caleb, who was at the table with his coffee, and said, "I'll start on the barn door in the morning. Which hinge is giving you trouble?" he told her. She nodded once, with the particular nod of someone filing information correctly, and went to where Eli had already fallen asleep against the wall and sat beside him and was herself. Asleep inside of 2 minutes, the economical, immediate sleep of someone who has learned that sleep is a resource and must be managed accordingly. Caleb sat at his table and looked at the three of them on his floor. He listened to the house, which sounded different with people in it, not louder, but occupied in a different way, the air distributed differently. He sat there until the stove burned 2 coals, banked it, went to bed, and lay in the dark, listening to the wind and thinking about what a house was supposed to feel like when it was working correctly. By the second morning, she had the barn door rehung on proper hardware she had found in his tool shed, hardware he had purchased 2 years ago and carefully stored and never installed, because the job required 2 people and he had been managing with 1. She worked efficiently, no wasted motion, each movement building on the last. Eli handed her things when she asked. Clara sat in a crate of clean straw nearby and watched with the total unself-conscious attention of a child who has not yet learned to distinguish between watching and doing. Caleb watched from the barn entrance, without announcing himself, with the eye of a man who knows what good work looks like. She understood the material. "You've done this before," he said, when she had finished the top hinge and was moving to the bottom. "My husband was a carpenter," she said, not looking up. "He taught me what he knew because it was useful to have 2 people who knew it. We worked most jobs together. Where is he now?" She did not look up from the hinge. "Fever 2 years ago, March. It was fast, which was the only mercy in it." He did not say he was sorry. It was not that he wasn't, he was, but she had said it in the tone of someone who has processed the fact sufficiently to state it plainly. And something in that tone communicated that condolence was not what was being offered, and therefore not what was required. "The wind wall is worse than the door," he said. "I know," she said. "I walked it this morning before you were up. The north face has a lean to it, and the bracing is fighting the wind instead of working with it. In a serious storm, it'll go." He had known this. He had been knowing it since September, hearing someone else say it plainly, without drama. As a fact to be addressed, rather than a problem to be worried about, was a different experience from knowing it alone, which had the quality of a weight you adjust to carrying, rather than a weight you set down. "Sterling's been working on my supply lines," he said. "The lumberyard in Pine Ridge is his. So is the general merchant." Evelyn looked up for the first time. She held his gaze for a moment with the direct, assessing look she gave things she was deciding about. "How far is Millhaven?" she said. 20 miles, they have a lumberyard." "Yes, then that's where we'll go," she said, and went back to the hinge. He stood for another moment, watching her work, and thought that this making a practical decision that involved another person's judgment was something he had not done in 3 years. It was strange, and not unpleasant. She made dinner that first evening, a venison stew, from what was in the larder. Nothing complicated, nothing that required ingredients he didn't have, simply the right use of what was there. She put it on the table, and sat down and fed Clara from her own bowl, and listened while Eli talked about the barn door and the hinge and how the old hardware had been wrong for the weight of the door, explaining it with his hands, which was how Eli explained mechanical things. Caleb listened. Not the performed listening of an adult tolerating a child's account, but the actual listening of someone who finds the information genuinely interesting and who has enough respect for accurate observation to attend to it carefully, regardless of its source. He asked questions. Eli answered them with growing confidence, because confidence in a boy that age grows in direct proportion to the quality of attention being paid to what he says, which is true of most people at most ages, but is particularly visible in a 7-year-old who has recently lost the person who used to pay that kind of attention. Evelyn watched this across the table and did not say anything about it, which was its own kind of statement. Sterling came back on a Thursday, the 4th day after Evelyn arrived, which meant he had been watching. 3 men this time instead of 2. Caleb was in the yard, splitting wood. Evelyn was on the north barn wall, cross-bracing with the lumber they had brought from Millhaven 2 days before. Sterling looked at her with his pleasant expression, the expression of a man who processes everything as information, who is always several moves ahead in a game he has already decided he is playing. "Hired help," he said, as though confirming something he had already put in a column. "Partner," Caleb said. Something shifted behind Sterling's pleasant expression, a small recalculation. "Partners need to be on the deed." "Then she'll be on the deed," Caleb said. Sterling produced papers from his coat, a new version of the same offer, or a version similar enough to the same offer to serve the same purpose, and began his speech about the particular vulnerabilities of single operation ranches in extended cold seasons and the wisdom of making decisions before circumstances made them for you. Evelyn came down from the wall, hammer in one hand, cut timber in the other, still wearing her work gloves, and walked to where Sterling was standing and looked at the papers he was holding. "That survey notation," she said, pointing to a specific line. "The section marker is wrong. The creek boundary runs 20 feet east of where this document shows it. I walked the boundary line 2 days ago and checked it against the physical landmarks." Sterling looked at her. "If this deed transfer is executed on that notation," she said, "the transfer is contestable under Montana Territorial Land Code, Section 14, because the boundary description in the conveyance document doesn't correspond to the physical landmarks on the ground. Any competent judge in Helena reviewing this transfer would void it for that reason alone." She handed Caleb the timber she was carrying. She turned around and went back up the wall. There was a silence in the yard that had a particular quality to it, the silence of a recalculation being performed. "She's bluffing," one of Sterling's men said. "She isn't," Sterling said quietly. He looked at the paper for a long moment, then folded it and put it back in his coat with the careful movements of someone who is not going to give away what he is thinking. "We'll continue this conversation, Thorne." "I expect we will," Caleb said. Sterling rode away. Caleb stood in the yard and looked at the north wall, where Evelyn was already back at work, the sound of her hammer steady and rhythmic in the cold air. "How did you know about the survey notation?" he called up. She did not stop working. "I read your deed the first night. It was in the box under the floorboard in the front room. You should find a more secure location for it." He stood there for a moment. Then he went inside and moved the deed. The house changed over those weeks in the way that houses change when someone decides to take them seriously again, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, in the hours between outdoor work and kitchen work, in the attention paid to the things that had been accumulating since the care had stopped. Evelyn found the trunk in the back room with the bolt of dark wool in it. She did not ask about it. She used what the house needed and left what it didn't. And the curtains that went up on the windows were cut and hung with the precision of a woman who measures twice and cuts once, and who understands that fabric at a window is not decoration but insulation, that the gap between the glass and the room is where the cold gets its best purchase. Caleb noticed them on a Tuesday afternoon, came in from the barn, and saw them hanging in the kitchen windows, heavy and dark and immediately effective, and did not say anything about where they had come from. He simply looked at them for a moment and nodded once and went to wash his hands. The floors got linseed oil. She oiled the window frames. She cut burlap for the gap under the back door and fixed the latch that had needed fixing since the previous winter. She replaced 3 soft boards on the porch. None of it was done as a statement. It simply happened in the time available, steadily, the way good maintenance happens when someone with the knowledge is present to do it. One evening, Caleb came in from the last barn check and stopped in the kitchen doorway and understood something that he had not understood until that moment. The kitchen smelled like pine and sage and something baking and a fire that had been tended all day, which were smells that his body recognized before his mind did. That moved through him in a way that was not thought and not quite feeling, but something older than either, the recognition of something that had been absent long, enough that its return was almost a shock. The smell of a house that was being lived in. He stood in the doorway for a moment without coming in. Evelyn was at the stove. Eli was at the table with his letters, tongue between his teeth, writing with the intense physical concentration of a boy who has not yet made peace with the difficulty of forming letters. Clara was in the low wooden chair Caleb had made for her that week, her own chair, sized for her, with a straight back she had been using to pull herself toward, standing busy with the wooden spoon she carried everywhere, conducting some investigation of its properties that apparently required repetition. Nobody looked up. He came in. He sat down. He picked up the coffee that was already poured at his place and held it in both hands and sat in the warm kitchen that smelled right and listened to the sounds of a house that was occupied correctly and understood that something in him had shifted that was not going to shift back. The bond between Caleb and Eli built itself through work, through the particular equality a shared task creates, through the accumulated evidence of being taken seriously. Eli did not perform usefulness. He simply saw what needed doing and did his part, which was a quality Caleb recognized immediately and valued above most others. You could teach skills. You could not teach that. Caleb included him naturally, explaining things plainly as one working person explains to another, asking questions that required real thought and listening to the answers, the way he would have listened to any adult. He showed him how to check a horse's hooves, how to read an animal's posture for what it communicated, how the tack room was organized and why each thing in its specific location, so that in the dark, in a hurry, you could find what you needed by feel, how to drive a post correctly, how to split wood with the grain. Eli absorbed it with the genuine hunger of a boy who has been waiting for someone to show him things and has finally found that person. One afternoon in early December, working the south fence in the pale winter light, Eli said out of nowhere, in the direct way he had, "Did you always know how to do all this?" "No," Caleb said, "driving a post. My father taught me." And before him, his father, goes back as far as anyone can remember. Eli held the wire taut, thinking about this. "My father was teaching me things," he said, "before he died. He showed me reading a level and finding north from moss and how to whittle with the grain." A pause. "He was going to show me more. He would have," Caleb said. He said it simply, without inflation, not as comfort, just as a thing that was true and worth saying. "How do you know?" Eli said, not challenging, just asking. "Because he was already showing you the right things," Caleb said. "A man who starts there was going to keep going." Eli was quiet for a stretch, working the wire. "Are you going to show me more things?" he said, finally. Caleb drove the last post on that section and straightened up and looked at the boy. "If you keep showing up," he said. Eli nodded, as though that had confirmed something he had already suspected. They walked back to the barn in the late afternoon, and Eli counted the posts. They had driven 37, he announced, when they reached the gate, and Caleb said, "Good count." And Eli said he was going to keep track of all the posts they drove all winter and add them up in the spring. And Caleb said that sounded reasonable, and they went in to supper. It was the kind of conversation that you don't remember later as a single moment, but that deposits itself into the fabric of how things are, so that when you look back, you can't point to when the arrangement became what it became. You can only see that at some point it had, The idea of the marker posts came on a Wednesday afternoon in late November, when Evelyn went out to check the sky and stood in the yard a long time looking at the northwest. She had grown up in Minnesota. Her father had read Weather the way some men read books, slowly, looking for what was actually there. She had learned from him to notice the quality of a sky's stillness, the particular flatness of light that means something is deciding at a distance, not the storm itself, but what comes before the storm, the weeks away signal. She went inside and found Caleb at the table. "I want to drive marker posts," she said, "from the main road to your gate." He looked up. "What for?" "So that someone who needs to find this place in a whiteout can find it." He looked at her for a moment. "You're expecting something?" "I think something is deciding," she said. "I want to be ready for what comes with it." He held her gaze for a moment. "Posts and a maul are in the shed. I've got 40-odd posts, maybe 50. That's enough for the road section," she said. "I'll do it in the morning." "We'll do it," he said, and went back to his calculations. They drove the posts on a Thursday, starting before full light. 43 of them, chest-spaced, from the main road to the Silver Creek gate. Caleb on the maul for the first 20. Evelyn for the last 23, trading without discussion at the natural breakpoint. Eli walked alongside, counting. Clara watched from the sled, bundled in every blanket they owned. The sky above them was white and absolutely still, the stillness of something that has gathered itself and not yet released. They finished by midday, came inside, ate, and did not discuss what they had done or when it might be needed. That evening, Eli walked the line one more time and came in at supper to announce the final count. That evening, Sterling sent a rider, not Sterling himself, which was its own communication, a step down in the hierarchy of pressure, to inform Caleb that the Pine Ridge lumberyard was no longer extending credit to Silver Creek Ranch accounts. Effective immediately, Evelyn took the message at the door. She thanked the rider. She closed the door. She went to her ledger, the cloth-bound record book she had been keeping since the first week, logging temperatures, feed consumption, structural work completed, materials used, the state of the wind wall and the pipes and the barn roof on each day. She checked them and wrote down the date and the information and the name of the rider and closed the ledger and put it back in her coat. "Millhaven," Caleb said, from the table. "Millhaven," she agreed. The storm came on a Wednesday night, which was 3 weeks after the posts went in. It did not arrive, it erupted. By midnight, the wind was driving snow horizontally, and the temperature had dropped another 15 degrees below where it had been, which had already been severe. And the sound against the walls was not wind sound anymore, but something more fundamental, like the expression of a large, indifferent force that has decided the time for demonstration has arrived. Caleb checked the barn at 10 and again at midnight, moving each time by feel and memory and the rope line he had strung between the house door and the barn door in the first year on the ranch, which had turned out to be the most useful single thing he had ever constructed on the property. Evelyn was awake when he came back from the midnight check. She was at the window, not looking out, because there was nothing to see. The white was total, but listening. She had been listening since the storm started, in the way of someone tracking something that requires monitoring. "The wall is holding," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "I know," she said. "I can hear the difference. The way it sounds through a structure that's braced correctly versus one that's fighting itself, it's different." He hung his coat and stood beside her at the window. The sound outside was enormous and very near and absolutely indifferent to anything happening on the human side of the walls. "You've been in storms like this before," he said. "Close," she said. "Not quite like this, but close enough to know what to pay attention to." At 2:30 in the morning, Caleb heard something. He was not certain at first. The wind had been so loud for so long that his mind had developed its own internal model of what the storm sounded like, and anything that didn't fit the model registered as anomalous before it registered as specific. He heard it or felt it a second time, a pattern in the sound that was not the storm's pattern, rhythmic, intentional. He put on his coat without explaining himself, because Evelyn was already reaching for hers. They went out together into the white, moving along the rope line first, and then, when it ended at the gate, navigating by the marker posts. The first one appeared out of the dark, 2 feet in front of Caleb's outstretched hand. Then the second. They moved from post to post, bending into the wind, each post a checkpoint in the white. At the gate, barely visible, 2 shapes and something dark behind them. A man, standing, but only just the posture of someone who has been walking in serious cold for a long time and whose body has started making calculations about what it can continue to afford. A woman, sitting in the snow, leaning against the side of a wagon with a shattered rear wheel, one hand flat against her belly, the other on the frozen ground beside her. The posts, the man said, when he saw them. His voice had been used almost all the way up. We followed the posts. His name was Thomas. Her name was Mary. They had been traveling from Billings toward her sister's place in Cascade when the wagon wheel shattered 12 miles back. The horse had gone lame in the last mile. They had walked the remaining distance through the full force of the storm, following the line of marker posts one at a time through the white post to post, never able to see more than the one immediately ahead, which was the only reason they were standing at the Silver Creek gate in the middle of a blizzard instead of frozen in the snow somewhere along the road. Mary was 8 months along. Her labor had started an hour before they reached the gate. Caleb carried her across the yard. She could not walk, and there was nothing to argue about moving in the dark by memory. Evelyn ahead, opening the barn door, Thomas at Caleb's side. They put her in the barn because Evelyn had taken one look at Mary's face in the lantern light and made the assessment in the time it takes to make an assessment when you know what you are looking for. And the barn was warmer than the house by several degrees with the animals in it, and with the wind wall now braced correctly against the north side. And because a barn with clean straw and a good lantern is, for certain purposes, exactly what is needed. Thomas, Evelyn said, once Mary was settled. Her voice was steady, not calm, which is a different and less useful thing, but steady, which was what the situation required. Go to the house. Caleb will go with you. Put the large pot of water on the stove. Bring me the second lantern from the shelf by the door, the 2 white cloths in the second drawer of the kitchen dresser, and the brown bottle on the shelf above the stove. Can you hold those? Yes, Thomas said. Go now, she said. I'll call you. Thomas went. Caleb stood for one moment in the barn doorway and looked at Evelyn, who was already kneeling beside Mary, and understood from the quality of her focus that she had done this before and that it was going to be all right, and went. He went. What happened in that barn over the next 4 hours is not something I was there for. What I know is what Caleb told, years later, sitting on the Silver Creek porch with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands, choosing each word with the care of someone who understands that the right word and the almost right word are not the same thing, and that the difference matters. He sat in the kitchen with Thomas and did nothing useful for 4 hours, which was one of the hardest sustained efforts of his life. Thomas shook, not from cold, they were warm enough, but from fear that had nowhere to go, and Caleb sat with him the way you sit with someone who needs presence rather than words. Eli woke up at some point and came to the table in his socked feet and put his hand on Thomas's arm. Thomas covered it with his own. They sat like that. Clara slept through all of it. At 6:30 in the morning, the barn door opened and Evelyn appeared in the rectangle of gray dawn light, and she looked at Caleb across the yard, and she nodded. He crossed the yard. The storm had not ended but had dropped to something manageable, still heavy, still loud, but with the sense that the worst of it had moved east, that the pressure had shifted, that the scale of things was returning toward the ordinary. Inside the barn, in the clean straw, in the amber light of 2 lanterns, Mary was resting. The particular rest of someone who has done something enormous and is now on the other side of it. Evelyn held out the baby. It was wrapped in the length of unbleached muslin she had been using for pipe insulation. She had washed it and heated it near the stove the previous evening. Before the storm had reached full strength, before Thomas and Mary had appeared at the gate, she had done it because she was the kind of person who looked at a sky that was deciding and drove 43 posts into frozen ground, who prepared for what comes with things rather than for the things themselves. She had heated the muslin before anyone arrived, because she had known that warmth would be needed in some form, and it was the form she had. Caleb looked at the bundle in her hands. He looked at Evelyn. "She's healthy," Evelyn said. "Mary is well. Thomas can come in." She paused. "Take her for a moment. I need both hands." He took the baby. He had not held a baby since the winter 3 years ago that lived at the back of his mind in a place he did not go directly, that he navigated around in the way you navigate around a thing in the dark that you know is there. He had learned to navigate around it so automatically that most days he was not aware he was doing it. He held this baby in the gray Montana morning, in the barn that smelled of straw and lantern smoke and the particular smell of new life, while the storm moved east and the sky began its slow return to ordinary, and he stood there for a long time not moving, not thinking anything he could have put into language, simply holding the weight of it, the impossible specific weight of a very new person and being where he was. The baby's eyes were not quite focused. She was doing what very new babies do, present in the world in some way that has not yet developed the apparatus for selectivity, receiving everything with equal and total attention. She looked at him, or in his direction, or at the general phenomenon of the world, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything, and it was enough. Evelyn came back and took her gently. "Go get Thomas," she said. "He's waited long enough." Caleb went to the house and got Thomas, who went across the yard at something between a walk and a run that a man does when he is trying to control himself and is not entirely succeeding. Caleb stood in the yard for a moment before following. The storm had dropped to a strong wind and intermittent snow, and the sky in the northwest had lightened from black to the gray of early morning, and the marker posts were visible along the road in the growing light, 43 of them, standing in the frozen ground where Evelyn had driven them 3 weeks before, because she had looked at the sky and understood that something was deciding. He stood there in the cold morning air and breathed it in and did not cry, because that was not his way. But he stood there longer than the weather strictly required, and he looked at the sky going lighter in the northwest, and he thought about the evening a woman had appeared at his gate with 2 children and offered him a trade. He had thought at the time that he was doing her a favor. He understood now that it had been, from the beginning, entirely the other way. The county inspector arrived in February, dispatched by the territorial authority in response to Sterling's formal complaint, which was the steps Sterling had been constructing toward since November. The complaint that Silver Creek Ranch was an abandoned operation being artificially maintained for the purpose of contesting a legitimate sale, and that the territorial abandonment provision should apply. His name was Hargrove. He was a careful man with a surveyor's kit and a notebook, and the particular expression of someone who has learned to form conclusions slowly because forming them quickly has caused him problems in the past. He came on a Tuesday morning when the sky was clear and the cold had the bright, declarative quality of a Montana February day that knows what it is. He walked the property for 2 hours. The barn doors sat true in their frames. The roof was sound. The stalls were clean. Evelyn produced the ledger from her coat pocket without being asked. Temperatures, feed records, structural work, materials, dated every single day since November, and he read it carefully, because it was the kind of document that repays careful reading. The wind wall he pushed with both hands. It did not move. The pipes were lagged in Evelyn's wooden insulation boxes. Not a single freeze event all winter. He came into the house and looked at it, the curtains, the oiled floor, the working latch, the new porch boards, the pot that had been on the stove all morning, Eli at the table with his letters, Clara in her chair. He looked at Caleb standing by the window in the way of a man who belongs in a room. He wrote something in his notebook. Then he said the thing about Sterling's claim, the abandonment provision, the burden of proof, and said that he did not see a case for abandonment, and that he would file his report in Helena by end of month, and that Sterling could contest it, but that the burden of proof in any such contest would be substantially on him. He left. Caleb stood at the window, and watched him ride down the drive past the marker posts, which were still in the ground, and which Evelyn had said to leave until the spring storms had passed. "That's it," Caleb said. "That's the beginning of the end of it," she said. "He'll try something else. But this particular approach is finished." "How do you know?" She was writing in the ledger. "Because this is the kind of man who moves to the next thing when the current thing doesn't work. He doesn't stay with a method that has failed him. He finds a new one." She closed the ledger. "The new one will be smaller. We've taken away the large option." She was right. Sterling tried one more thing, sent a man to Thomas and Mary, who were still at Silver Creek with the baby. The travel to Cascade deferred, while Mary recovered and the weather held, and the baby, who they had named June, was 6 weeks old and gaining weight and entirely herself. The man offered Thomas money, a generous sum, and the full repair of the wagon, and funded passage to Cascade in exchange for a signed statement that when he and Mary arrived at Silver Creek Ranch during the storm, the property had appeared to him to be in a state of disrepair and marginal habitability. Thomas came to the kitchen with the written offer still in his hand. He sat down at the table and looked at Caleb and said, in the plain voice of a man stating something that should not need stating, but apparently requires stating, "That woman delivered my daughter in a barn she had made warm enough that my daughter survived being born in it in a Montana blizzard. What kind of man do you think I am?" Caleb took the offer. He walked it out to the fire they kept burning in the yard for warmth, and he fed it to the fire, and he watched it go. And that was the last thing that arrived from Gideon Sterling. In the spring, when the ground thawed enough to work, and the creek ran clear again, and the aspens along the south fence came in pale green in the way aspens do, Caleb had a lawyer in Millhaven draw up partnership papers. He put Evelyn's name on the deed, the actual deed, not a working arrangement, not a temporary agreement of convenience, but the document that would be recorded in Helena and that would stand in any court in the territory, Silver Creek Ranch. Equal partnership, Caleb Thorne and Evelyn Vance. He gave her the papers on an April morning at the kitchen table. With the window open and the smell of the spring coming through it, and Clara pulling herself to standing on the chair, she now considered her personal property. Evelyn read them carefully. She read them the way she read everything that had legal weight for accuracy, for what was actually being said as distinct from what appeared to be being said, for the specific language that would hold or not hold when tested. She had read the original deed that first week. She knew what the language should look like. These papers were right. She looked up. "This is right," she said. "Yes," he said. She signed them. He signed them. The lawyer's copy went to Helena that afternoon. The ranch copy went into the deed box, which Caleb had moved to a location he would not be telling anyone about, because Evelyn had told him to, and she was not wrong about these things. Thomas and Mary left for Cascade on a clear morning in late April, June wrapped in the muslin cloth from the barn, which Mary had asked to keep, and which Caleb had said yes to, without a moment's hesitation. They waved from the wagon as it went down the drive. And Caleb and Evelyn and Eli stood on the porch and waved back. And Clara waved because everyone else was waving, and she had recently become very interested in waving as a concept. The wagon went around the bend in the road and was gone. And Eli went inside, and Clara was on the porch in her chair. And Caleb stood at the rail, and Evelyn stood beside him. And they looked at the spring valley below the ranch, vivid and sudden in the way of Montana Springs, as though the land had been saving it and did not say anything for a while, which was something they had gotten very good at over the long winter, which is one of the things that takes the longest to learn with another person, and which, once learned, is not something you give up. The ranch ran well that year, and the year after, and the year after that, better than it had since before Caleb's wife died. Partly the structural work, partly the partnership agreement that kept Sterling permanently at a distance, partly the indefinable efficiency of two people who have figured out how to work together, which is different from and more than the sum of what either of them could do alone. Caleb taught Eli to ride that summer. Eli fell off 4 times and got back on 5. Clara took her first steps on the porch on a September morning. 3 lurching, determined steps from her chair to Caleb's outstretched hands, and sat down hard on the boards and looked at what she had done with the expression of someone who has just discovered something important. He picked her up. She grabbed his collar with both hands and looked at the valley. He stood there on that porch with that child in his arms and looked at the valley going gold below and thought about the night of the storm and the barn and the gray morning light and the particular specific weight of a new life in his hands. And he thought about what Evelyn had said, ready for what comes with it, and understood, finally, fully, what she had been talking about all along. She had known. She had looked at the sky that November afternoon and driven 43 posts into frozen Montana ground because she understood that a storm was coming, and that storms carry things with them, things that need to be able to find their way in. The preparation was the love. The posts were the love. The warm barn and the heated muslin and the ledger that could not be argued with, all of it was love, expressed in the only language that the frontier accepted. Work done correctly, in advance, for reasons that would only be understood later. He had opened the gate. She had driven the posts. The rest had followed the way things do when the right preparation meets the right moment, not easily, not without cost, but with the particular rightness of something that was always going to happen once the first decision was made correctly. On that September porch, with Clara in his arms, and the valley going gold below, and Evelyn somewhere inside the house behind him, Caleb Thorne understood that he was no longer a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had opened a gate in 30 below cold, and everything he needed had come through it. Thank you for being here today. In the winter of 1886, a woman drove 43 posts into frozen Montana ground before the storm arrived, not because anyone asked her to, but because she had looked at the sky and understood what was coming, and because preparation, done quietly and without expectation, is its own complete form of love. This is a story about what happens when a person who has closed everything down is given not a reason to open back up, but simply a gate to open, and discovers that sometimes that single act is enough to let everything else through. Consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. Until then, keep the light on the porch.